The conference room smelled like old coffee and whatever someone had microwaved 2 hours earlier. That's what I remember first. Not her. Just that smell, and the sound of the HVAC clicking on, and the way the chair I was sitting in leaned slightly to the left no matter how I adjusted it. I had been at Meridian Analytics for about 7 months by then. Long enough to know where the good parking spots were, short enough that I still got the broken chair. I wasn't paying much attention to the meeting. That's the honest truth. I had my notebook open and I was writing things down, but mostly I was just trying to get through the day. That was the mode I was in back then. Get through the morning. Get through the afternoon. Drive home. Eat something. Sleep. Repeat. My divorce had been finalized 4 months earlier. 8 years of marriage, and then it was just paperwork and a Tuesday afternoon at a lawyer's office. I don't want to make it sound more painful than it was, but it left me kind of hollow. Not angry. Just quiet in a way I wasn't used to. So I was sitting there, slightly hollow, slightly bored, leaning left in my broken chair, when she walked in. Her name was Catherine Voss. I would learn that later. In that moment she was just a woman in her mid-40s carrying a leather portfolio and a cup of coffee, who paused at the door like she was checking to make sure she had the right room. She sat down near the middle of the table. Said hello to a couple of people. Opened her portfolio. Nothing about it stood out to me right away. The meeting was a cross-department budget review. One of those quarterly things that everyone attends and no one enjoys. She was presenting on behalf of the Strategic Partnerships Division. I could tell she had prepared. Her materials were organized. Her voice was steady. She clearly knew what she was talking about. She was maybe 3 slides in when it happened. There was a man named Greg Fallon sitting at the end of the table. Senior VP. The kind of guy who talked over people without realizing he was doing it, or maybe without caring. He waited until Catherine was mid-sentence, and then just started speaking. "Let me stop you there," he said. "I think what you're trying to say is that the numbers don't support the current allocation. Which we already knew. So what's new here?" She paused. Just for a second. "If you let me get to slide 7, she said, "I think that question gets answered. I'm just not sure why we're spending time on this," he said, and he looked around the table like he was checking if anyone agreed with him. A couple of people shifted in their seats. Nobody said anything. She moved to slide 7. She made her point. It was a good point. Clear, well-supported, practical. A younger guy across the table, Marcus, rephrased almost the exact same idea 30 seconds later, and Greg said, "Now that's what I'm talking about." Nobody blinked. Catherine didn't react visibly. She just wrote something down in her portfolio and kept going. But I watched her for a moment, and there was something in the way she pressed her pen a little harder against the page. That was the only sign. The meeting ended about 20 minutes later. People started gathering their things and drifting toward the door. I stayed seated for a minute because I had no particular reason to rush anywhere. Catherine was still at the table, closing her portfolio slowly, taking her time. Not because she was in no hurry. I think she just needed a second. I recognized that. The needing a second. I watched Greg stop near the door and say something to Marcus, and both of them laughed, and then they were gone. She didn't look up. I don't know exactly what made me stay. I told myself it was because I wanted to finish the note I was writing. But I hadn't been writing anything. She stood and picked up her coffee cup, which was probably cold by then. She glanced toward the window. Outside, the city was just doing what it does at 2 in the afternoon. Traffic. Gray sky. People walking fast somewhere. I picked up my notebook and stood up. I thought about just leaving. I almost did. Instead, I walked toward the door at the same angle she was, which put me roughly next to her as we both reached it. "That was a solid presentation," I said. It came out a little quieter than I meant it to. She looked at me. Not suspicious, not warm. Just looked. "Thanks," she said. We walked out into the hallway and went in separate directions. That was it. 40 seconds, maybe? Nothing happened. But I thought about it on the drive home. Not about her specifically. About the way she pressed that pen into the page, and how nobody said anything, and how she just kept going anyway. I thought about that for a while. I didn't see her again for almost 2 weeks. That wasn't unusual. Meridian had 4 floors and close to 200 people, and unless your work crossed paths with someone else's, you could go months without ending up in the same room. I wasn't looking for her exactly. But I noticed when she wasn't around, which I guess is its own kind of looking. I saw her again on a Thursday. It was just after 6 in the evening and most of the office had cleared out. I had stayed late to finish a client report that was due the next morning, and I was in the small kitchen on the 3rd floor making what was probably my 3rd cup of coffee for the day, which I didn't need but made anyway because it gave me something to do with my hands. She came in while I was standing there waiting for the machine to finish. She was still in her work clothes, but her jacket was off and her sleeves were pushed up slightly, and she had the look of someone who had been staring at a screen for too long. I recognized that look. I had been wearing it myself for the past 2 hours. She went to the refrigerator, opened it, stood there for a moment, and then closed it without taking anything. "Nothing good in there," I said. She turned around. It took her a second to place me. "The budget meeting," I said. "A couple weeks ago." "Right," she said. "The hallway." "Yeah." She leaned against the counter and crossed her arms, not in an unfriendly way. More like she was just tired and holding herself up. The coffee machine beeped. I poured a cup and then, without thinking about it much, held it toward her. "You look like you need this more than I do," I said. She looked at the cup. Then at me. "I'm fine," she said. "Okay." I set it on the counter between us anyway and poured myself a glass of water instead. She didn't take the coffee right away. But she didn't leave either. "Long day?" I asked. "They're all long days," she said. "Fair enough." We stood there for a minute without talking. The building made its end-of-days sounds. An elevator somewhere. The air system winding down. Outside the window the city was going orange and gray. She picked up the coffee. "I'm Catherine," she said. "Daniel," I said. "Dan, actually. Nobody calls me Daniel except my mother." She almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. "What do you do here, Dan?" "Data analysis. Risk modeling mostly. I'm on the 3rd floor." I paused. "You're in strategic partnerships. Been doing your research?" "It was on the meeting agenda," I said. This time she did smile, just a little. She looked down at the coffee cup and turned it slightly in her hands. "That was a good point you made in that meeting," I said. "The one on slide 7. She was quiet for a second. "Marcus made that point," she said, and her voice was even. No bitterness in it. Just a statement of what happened. "Marcus repeated it," I said. "You made it first." She looked at me. I couldn't tell if she was deciding whether to trust that or not. "It doesn't matter," she said. "Maybe not," I said. "I just noticed." She nodded slowly and looked back out the window. I almost left it there. But something kept me from it. "Does that happen a lot?" I asked. She turned the coffee cup again. "Does what happen? Someone talking over you like that? Taking the credit?" She was quiet for a moment. Long enough that I thought she might just shut the conversation down. "I've been in this field for 19 years, she said. "So yes. It happens." I didn't say anything. Sometimes saying nothing is better. "You get used to it," she said, but she didn't sound like she believed that completely. "I don't think you should have to," I said. She looked at me again, and this time it was a different kind of look. Not suspicious. Something more careful than that. "You're very earnest for a risk analyst," she said. "I've been told." She laughed then, a real one, short and quiet, and it changed her face entirely. We ended up staying in that kitchen for another 40 minutes. I don't know how it happened exactly. One thing led to another. She asked what kind of risk modeling I did, and I told her, and then she mentioned a project her division was trying to get off the ground and asked what I thought. I told her honestly. She pushed back on one part of it, and she was right to, and I said so. At some point we moved from the counter to the small table in the corner. I'm not sure when. She told me she had been at Meridian for 3 years, that she had come from a firm in Boston before that. She didn't talk about why she left Boston, and I didn't ask. I told her I had grown up in Ohio, that I had ended up here more or less by accident, that I had meant to move back after graduate school and just never did. "Do you wish you had?" she asked. "Sometimes," I said. "Less than I used to." She nodded like she understood that. I didn't mention the divorce. It was too early for that. But at one point she said something about cooking for one being a strange habit to develop, and I said I knew what she meant, and she looked at me in a way that suggested she heard what I wasn't saying. By the time I looked at my phone it was almost 8 o'clock. "I have a report due tomorrow," I said. "So do I," she said, and she sounded like she had forgotten about it entirely. We gathered our things. Walked back toward our respective desks. At the point where the hallway split she stopped and half-turned. "I'll probably be here late again tomorrow," she said. It wasn't quite an invitation. But it wasn't nothing either. "I might be too," I said. She nodded once, and then she went her way and I went mine. I sat back down at my desk and looked at my half-finished report for a while before I actually started working on it again. Not because I was thinking about her, exactly. I just felt, for the first time in a while, like I was slightly more awake than I had been before. Part 3, The Slow Change. She was there the next evening, like she said she might be. I didn't go looking for her. I finished what I was doing, went to the kitchen to refill my water, and she was sitting at that same small corner table with her laptop open and a pen tucked behind her ear. She glanced up when I walked in. "Report done?" she asked. "Send it at noon," I said. "Mine too." She didn't look back at her screen right away. I sat down across from her. Neither of us made a big thing of it. We just worked, mostly in silence, with a few exchanges here and there about nothing in particular. What time the building's heating system decided to kick in. Whether the coffee on the third floor was worse than the coffee on the second floor. It was. I drove home at 9:30 feeling like I'd had a normal evening. Which sounds like nothing, but at that point in my life it was something. 2 weeks passed. We ran into each other a few times. Hallway. Elevator. Once in the lobby when we happened to leave at the same time, and walk to the parking garage together without planning it. The conversations were easy. That was the thing I kept noticing. They were just easy. She was direct in a way I liked. She didn't fill silences with noise. She said what she thought and she meant it, and if she disagreed with something she said so without making it into a conflict. I found myself thinking about things during the day that I wanted to tell her. A weird piece of data I'd come across. An article I'd read. Something that had happened at lunch that she would probably find funny. I'd catch myself doing it and feel slightly surprised, like I hadn't given myself permission for that yet. By October we had made it an unofficial habit. Thursday evenings usually. Sometimes Wednesday. We'd work separately for a while, and then at some point slide into talking. The table in the kitchen became ours in the quiet way that things become yours without anyone claiming them. One Thursday she brought takeout containers, set one in front of me without asking, and said, "Thai. You eat Thai, right? How did you know that was a question I'd say yes to? You seem like a person who says yes to Thai food," she said, and opened her own container. I didn't know what that meant exactly, but I liked that she had thought about it at all. We started texting sometime around then. It started practically. She sent me a link to a report that was relevant to something we'd been discussing. I responded with a question. She answered. We went back and forth for a while, and at some point the report had nothing to do with what we were saying anymore. After that it just continued. Nothing constant. A few messages during the day, sometimes. A thought she'd had. Something that had irritated her. She'd send a one-line observation and I'd respond, and it felt like passing notes, which sounds juvenile but didn't feel that way at all. I noticed I checked my phone differently than I had before. Less out of habit, and more out of something that was closer to anticipation. I remember a specific Tuesday in November. It was raining, one of those gray all-day rains that makes everything feel like late afternoon no matter what time it is. I had a meeting cancel and found myself with an unexpected hour and a half. I texted her. "Free for coffee?" Actual coffee, not the floor 3 disaster. She responded in about 4 minutes. "There's a place on Clement Street. 12:30. It was the first time we met somewhere outside the building. I'm not sure either of us named that for what it was. The cafe was small, the kind with mismatched chairs and handwritten menus. She was already there when I arrived, holding her cup with both hands, watching the rain on the window. She had her hair down, which I hadn't seen before. She looked different outside the office. Easier somehow. We stayed for 2 hours. The conversation moved around the way it did when you've run out of small talk and started saying actual things. She told me about Boston. Not everything, but enough. A relationship that had ended badly, she said, and then moved on quickly. I told her about my marriage. The version I hadn't told most people. Not the summary, but some of the middle parts. The quiet years where we'd both stopped trying without either of us admitting it. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "That's a lonely thing to go through." Not "I'm sorry." Not "that must have been hard." Just that. And it was the right thing to say. On the walk back, she stepped around a puddle and her shoulder briefly touched mine, and neither of us moved away. December was busy for everyone. End-of-year numbers, budget submissions, the particular kind of exhaustion that comes from too many meetings crammed into too few weeks. We saw each other less. Texted more. One night around 11 she sent, still at the office, "Tell me something interesting." I thought about it for a minute and sent her a fact about migratory patterns of Arctic terns. She responded with a long string of questions about it, and then another, and we went back and forth until past midnight when she finally sent, "Okay, I'm going home. Good night, Dan." I put my phone down, smiling at the ceiling, which is when I started to understand that I might be in some trouble. January came. We were careful, both of us, in the way that people are careful when they know something is happening but haven't said it out loud yet. She worked under a different division head. I worked under Marcus Chin, who oversaw analytics. Our work overlapped occasionally, but we had no direct reporting relationship. I had checked. I want to be honest about that. I had checked. But careful is still a word that means something. We were aware of each other in rooms in a way that required effort to conceal. When she spoke in meetings, I paid a different kind of attention than I paid to anyone else. Not obviously, I hoped. But it was there. There were small things. The way she'd catch my eye across a conference table when someone said something particularly obtuse. A shared look that lasted a half-second longer than it needed to. The afternoon she came and sat on the edge of my desk to ask me something about a data point, and I could smell her perfume, and I stared at my screen harder than any screen has ever required. Once, in the kitchen, we reached for the cabinet door at the same time and her hand landed on mine. We both stopped. She pulled her hand back first and said, "Sorry." And I said, "No, go ahead." And we both went through the motions of being normal people, but my pulse was doing something it had no professional justification for. She started sitting closer when we worked at that corner table. Not dramatically. Just a few inches less between us than there had been before. I don't think she decided to do it consciously. These things happen gradually, and then one day you notice the distance is gone, and you can't remember exactly when it went. In February, she told me her department was being reviewed for a leadership restructure. There was a possibility her role would be absorbed into another division, which meant her position might be eliminated or significantly reduced. She said it calmly, the way she said most things, but I could hear something under it. "That's not right," I said. "Your division pulled the strongest partnership numbers last quarter." "I know that," she said. "Have you pushed back?" "I've raised it," she said. "Greg Fallon is on the review committee." She didn't have to say anything else. I sat with that for a moment. "What do you need?" I asked. "I don't know yet," she said. "I might need some data pulled together. Third-party benchmarks, comparable industry figures. Something that makes the case in a way that's hard to argue with." "Send me what you have," I said. "I'll put something together." She looked at me. "That's outside your scope." "Not really," I said. "It's analysis. That's what I do." She was quiet. "Why would you do that?" I looked at her for a moment. I had an answer, but it was too large for that moment, so I said the smaller version of it. "Because it's the right thing to do," I said. She held my gaze for just a second longer than felt casual, and then she looked down at her notes and said, "Okay. Thank you." We worked late that night. Side by side at the corner table, her with her portfolio and me with my laptop, building something together. The building emptied around us and we didn't notice. At some point she leaned over to point at something on my screen, and her hair brushed my shoulder, and she didn't pull back, and I didn't either. I drove home that night knowing that the thing I had been not naming for months was not going to stay quiet much longer. And I think somewhere in the back of my mind I had already started figuring out what I was going to say when it finally needed to be said. The analysis I put together took me 3 days. I pulled benchmarks from 8 comparable firms, cross-referenced partnership revenue against industry averages, and built a clean 1-page summary that made the case without needing any interpretation. Numbers that spoke for themselves. Catherine looked it over for a long time when I sent it to her, and then she sent back a single message. "This is really good, Dan." Then, after a pause, thank you. Genuinely, I didn't see her for most of that week. She was in back-to-back meetings with her division head, then with HR, then with people whose names I didn't know. I heard through the general office noise that the restructure review was ongoing. I didn't ask her about it directly. I figured she'd tell me when there was something to tell. The following Thursday she appeared at my desk around 4 in the afternoon. She sat down in the chair across from me, the one people used when they came to talk about something real, and she said, "They're keeping the division intact. My role stays." "Good," I said. "The benchmarks helped," she said. "Greg tried to push back and couldn't find a foothold." I nodded. She looked at me for a moment. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." She seemed like she wanted to say something else. Instead she said, "Thursday evening? I'll be here," I said. We met at the corner table like usual. She brought the Thai food again. We talked about the review, about her division, about a new project she was starting. Normal conversation. Easy. But something was different that night, and I think we both felt it. The air in the room was slightly altered. Like a pressure change before weather. At some point the work conversation ran out, and we just sat there for a while. She had her hands wrapped around her coffee cup. The building was quiet. Outside, it was the kind of February night that's just dark and cold, and still. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." She looked at the cup. "What is this for you? What are we doing?" I didn't answer right away. I thought about being careful. I thought about the ways I could give her a response that would keep things exactly as they were, which was safe and comfortable and not enough. "I don't know how to answer that without saying something that changes things," I said. "Maybe things should be changed," she said. I looked at her. She was looking at the table. "I've been trying not to make this complicated for you," I said. "I know," she said. "I've been doing the same thing." She set down the cup. Looked up. "I'm 46, Dan. I know how old you are. You're 38. I know how old I am too." She almost smiled but didn't quite. "I'm your senior manager's peer. We work in the same building. People notice things." "I know all of that," I said. So. I took a breath. "So I've been sitting across from you at this table for months and thinking about you when you're not around and noticing when you walk into a room, and I'm pretty sure that's not going away. That's the honest version." She was quiet. "I think I'm in love with you," I said. "I didn't plan for that. But there it is." The room stayed quiet for a long moment. She looked at me and I could see her working through something. Not the feelings part. I don't think the feelings were the question. It was everything around them. "I'm scared of what this costs you," she said. "If it goes wrong. Or even if it goes right and people decide to make it something it isn't." "I know," I said. "I've thought about it. And I'd rather face that with you than not have this at all." She looked at the window. The dark city outside. She was quiet for long enough that I started to make peace with the idea that she might say no. That she might say, "You're a good person and I care about you but I can't." She didn't say that. "I've been trying to talk myself out of this for 3 months," she said. "I want you to know that. I tried pretty hard." "Did it work?" "No," she said. She looked back at me. Her expression was careful and warm and something else I didn't have an exact word for. "I'm not good at this anymore," she said. I used to be, maybe. I don't know. It's been a long time since I let myself get here with someone. I'm not good at it either, I said. I don't think that's the part that matters. She reached across the table slowly and put her hand over mine. Just rested it there. Okay, she said, quietly. Like a decision she had made somewhere before this moment, and was only now saying out loud. Okay, I said. We sat like that for a while. Not talking. The coffee went cold. Neither of us moved to do anything about it. At some point she said, "We need to be careful about how we handle this. The work side of it." I know, I said. I've been thinking about that. I don't want there to be anything to whisper about, she said. I'd rather just be honest about it. Me too. That means talking to HR, probably sooner than feels comfortable. I know, I said. We do it right or we don't do it. She nodded. There was something in her that seemed to relax slightly when I said that. Like she'd been waiting to see if I understood. We walked out together that night. Not holding hands in the hallway, not yet, but side by side in a way that felt different from before. At the elevators she pressed the button and we waited. I'm still scared, she said. Same, I said. The elevator opened. She got in. I took the stairs because my car was on a lower level. Just before the doors closed she looked at me, and I looked back, and neither of us said anything. I walked down 2 flights of stairs feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Not quite happiness. Something quieter than that. The kind of feeling you get when something that had been uncertain for a long time finally becomes clear. I sat in my car for a few minutes before starting it. The garage was almost empty. Fluorescent lights humming. Someone's footsteps echoing a level up. I thought about the coffee kitchen the first time. The meeting before that. The way she pressed her pen into the page and just kept going. I thought, yeah. Of course it was her, *. Then I started the car and drove home. We went to HR on a Monday morning. Catherine had set up the meeting the previous week, quiet and efficient about it, the way she handled things she didn't want to overthink. The HR director was a woman named Paula Reyes. She was professional about it, asked a few clarifying questions about our working relationship, confirmed that Catherine and I had no direct reporting line between us. She said she noted in both our files and recommended we document that the disclosure had been made. She told us to be mindful of appearances in professional settings. That was more or less it. We walked out of her office and stood in the hallway for a second. That was almost anticlimactic, I said. Good, Catherine said. Anticlimactic is what we wanted. She was right. We had done the thing correctly. Whatever came next, we had nothing to hide and we both knew it. What came next was the whispers. I don't know exactly when it started. These things don't announce themselves. One day everything is fine and then you start to notice the slight pause when you walk into a room. The conversations that reorganize themselves. The way 2 people at the far end of an office kitchen stop talking when you come in to refill your water. The first concrete thing I heard was secondhand. A colleague of mine named Jeff mentioned, with the particular casualness people use when they're not sure how to say something, that he'd heard my name come up in a conversation he hadn't been part of. Something about Catherine and me. Something about how it probably hadn't started recently. People are just talking, he said. You know how it is. What are they saying? I asked. He shrugged in a way that meant he knew but didn't want to be the one to repeat it. I had a reasonable idea. That I had gotten close to her for professional reasons. That the analysis I'd done for her department review was something other than what it was. That she had encouraged it, or that I had, and that the whole thing was some kind of arrangement. None of it was said to my face. That's how these things work. They live in the space just outside your hearing. Catherine found out about an anonymous email before I did. She told me about it on a Wednesday evening, sitting at the corner table, her voice even and controlled. Someone had sent a message to a general department address suggesting that the retention of her division had been influenced by a personal relationship with someone in analytics. It didn't name me specifically. It didn't have to. She put her phone face down on the table after she read it to me. It's not true, I said. I know it's not true, she said. HR has the documentation. The timeline is clear. I know, she said. She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was careful. I've spent 19 years building something, she said. I've had to fight for every room I've been allowed to be in. And someone can just send an email, and suddenly that's the conversation. I didn't say anything. There was nothing useful to say. The worst part, she said, is that people who know me are reading it and considering it. Even for a second. That's the part one can't shake. I sat with that. What do you want to do? I asked. She looked at me. What I want is for it not to be happening. I know. What I'm going to do, she said, is go to work tomorrow and do my job and not give anyone anything real to look at. About a week after that, she sat down across from me at my desk mid-morning, which she didn't usually do, and I could tell something was different before she said anything. I've been thinking, she said. Okay. She folded her hands on the desk. I wonder if we're making this harder for each other than it needs to be. If a little distance for a while might let things settle. I looked at her. I don't mean permanently, she said. I just mean, give it some space. Let the noise die down. And you think it would? I said. Die down? I don't know, she admitted. Catherine, I said. We haven't done anything wrong. I know that. So I'm not going to act like we have. She pressed her lips together. It's not just about us. Your reputation matters too. If people think you got close to me for career reasons, that follows you. I'll take that risk, I said. I don't want you to have to. I know, I said. But you don't get to make that choice for me. She looked at me for a long moment. Something moved through her expression. I think it was the being looked after. I think she wasn't used to it. I don't want to lose what we have because of people who don't know us, I said. She looked down at her hands. Neither do I. Then let's not, I said. She nodded slowly. Didn't say anything else. After a moment she stood up and went back to her side of the building. The thing that changed the conversation, eventually, was a project that had nothing to do with Catherine. In March, our division was brought in to support a risk assessment for a potential acquisition. Significant deal, 8 figures, the kind of thing that goes up to the executive committee. I had been assigned to the team but in a supporting role. 2 weeks in, the lead analyst had a family emergency and had to step away abruptly. Marcus asked me to take point. I want to be clear that I didn't think of it in terms of the gossip. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I just did the work. I spent 3 weeks on that assessment. I rebuilt parts of the model from scratch because some of the assumptions in the original framework didn't hold up under examination. I ran the numbers 6 different ways to make sure what I was seeing was real. When I presented to the executive committee, I had 40 minutes and I used 32 of them. The CFO asked me for follow-up questions. I answered all of them without notes. The acquisition moved forward. The final terms were close to what my assessment had outlined. I'm not saying that to sound impressive. I'm saying it because that was the moment things shifted. Not immediately, not completely, but gradually. The way reputation actually changes, which is slowly and then all at once when enough people have updated their opinion without realizing they have. Marcus stopped by my desk a few days after and said, "Good work." Simple as that. Greg Fallon passed me in the hallway around that time and gave me a nod that was a little more than the nod he had been giving me before. Which is a small thing. But I noticed it. The whispers didn't stop overnight. But they got quieter. And when they were replaced by something else, by the work and what it showed, there was less room for them. One evening in late March, Catherine and I were walking to our cars after a long day. It was one of those early spring nights where the air is cold but you can feel that it's running out of reasons to be. She hadn't brought up the distance idea again. I hadn't either. At her car she stopped and turned around, leaning back against the door. "I heard about the acquisition assessment," she said. "It was just work," I said. "People are talking about it," she said. "Differently than they were talking before." "Good," I said. She studied me for a second. "You didn't do it to fix anything, did you? You just did it because it was the work." "Yeah," I said. She nodded slowly. Something in her settled. I'm glad you didn't let me pull back, she said. I told you I wouldn't. I know. She looked at me. I'm glad you meant it. The parking garage was mostly empty. Somewhere above us a car engine started up and echoed off the concrete. She was looking at me the way she sometimes looked at me when she thought I wasn't paying full attention, which I always was. Take me somewhere for dinner, she said. Somewhere that's not this building. Yeah, I said. Let's do that. We drove separately and met at a small Italian place 3 blocks away that she had been to before and I hadn't. We sat at a table by the window and ordered too much food and talked for 2 hours about nothing in particular. The neighborhood going by outside. A book she was reading. Whether the bread was as good as the one at the Thai place near the office, which it wasn't, but it was close. It was an ordinary evening. That was the best part of it. Just 2 people having dinner, with the hard part still partly ahead of them, and the noise a little quieter than it had been, and enough space now to just sit and eat and be 2 people instead of whatever the rumors had decided we were. I remember thinking that normal was underrated. I still think that. The idea of moving in together came up sideways, the way most real decisions do. It was a Sunday in June. Catherine was at my apartment, which had become a regular enough thing that she kept a coffee mug on my counter and a book on my nightstand and had strong opinions about which side of the bed was better. She was sitting on the floor with her back against the couch going through some work papers, and I was in the kitchen making eggs, and at some point I realized we hadn't spoken in about 40 minutes, and it was completely fine. Better than fine. The quiet felt inhabited rather than empty. She looked up at some point and said, "Your kitchen gets good morning light." "It does," I said. "Mine doesn't," she said, and went back to her papers. About a week later she mentioned that her lease was coming up in October. She said it neutrally, the way you mention something without quite saying the thing underneath it. "What are you thinking?" I asked. She looked at me. "I don't know yet." But she did know. I think we both did. We talked about it properly a few nights later, over dinner at her place. Practical conversation. Square footage and commute times and whose furniture was better, which was honestly a draw. She had a better couch. I had a better bed. We could work with that. There was one moment near the end of it where she got quiet, and I asked her what she was thinking. "I just want to make sure we're doing this because it makes sense," she said. "And not because it's the next thing you do." "It makes sense," I said. "And I want to." "Both things," she said. "Both things," I said. She nodded slowly. "Okay then." We found a place in October. A 2-bedroom on the 4th floor of a building with an elevator that was unreliable and a superintendent named Roy who was extremely reliable. The apartment had good light, and old wood floors and a kitchen that was smaller than either of ours but workable if you didn't mind being close. We didn't mind being close. Moving in together is one of those things that sounds significant but mostly just feels like a lot of boxes and decisions about where the bookshelf goes. The real part of it comes later. After the boxes are unpacked. When you start figuring out the rhythms. She made coffee every morning without asking if I wanted any, which I always did. I did the dishes without being asked, which she noticed and mentioned once, and then never mentioned again because it became a given. She stayed up later than me. I woke up earlier. We found the overlap and lived in it. She met my sister in November. They got along well, which didn't surprise me. My sister is direct in the same way Catherine is, and they found each other immediately, and by the end of dinner they were talking about something that had nothing to do with me, which felt right. I met Catherine's younger brother around Christmas. Quieter than her, same sharp eyes. He pulled me aside at one point and asked me, without any particular aggression, what my intentions were. I told him honestly. He nodded and seemed satisfied, and that was that. Her career kept moving. She was asked to lead a new cross-divisional initiative in the new year, something the executive team had been trying to get off the ground for 2 years without traction. She built the team herself and set the structure, and by spring it was producing results that people were paying attention to. I watched her from a comfortable distance, and thought about the budget meeting where someone had talked over her, and Greg Fallon's face when he hadn't been able to find a foothold in the numbers, and how she had just pressed her pen into the page and kept going. She had always been this. People had just needed to catch up. My own work was going well. The acquisition assessment had opened some doors. I was being pulled into higher-level projects, asked for input in rooms I hadn't been in before. I stayed careful and did the work and tried not to read too much into any of it. We didn't talk about work constantly at home. There's a version of two professional people living together where that's all it becomes, and we were both aware of that and avoided it without making a rule of it. Home was home. Work was work. They overlapped sometimes. That was fine. It was a Saturday morning in April. Late morning, the lazy kind. We had no particular plans. She was reading on the couch, legs folded under her, mug on the side table. I had been doing something in the other room and came and sat on the other end of the couch, and she shifted her legs automatically to make room without looking up from her book. I sat there for a minute. I had not planned what happened next. I want to be clear about that. There was no reservation, no speech prepared, no moment I had engineered. It just surfaced the way things do when they've been settling in you for long enough. "Hey," I said. She looked up. "I want to marry you," I said. She looked at me for a moment. The book stayed open in her hands. "Okay," she said slowly. "Is that a question?" "Yeah," I said. "I guess it is." She set the book down on her lap. She looked at me the way she sometimes looked at me when she was figuring out whether I meant something completely. "I mean it," I said. "I'm not being casual about it. I know what I want." She was quiet. Not the uncertain kind of quiet. The kind where someone is letting something land properly. "I was not expecting that this morning," she said. "Me neither," I said honestly. She looked at me for another moment. Something in her face was doing several things at once. I let it. "Yes," she said. Straightforward. Certain. I reached over and took her hand and she leaned her head against my shoulder, and we stayed like that for a while. The apartment quiet around us. The city going about its Saturday outside the window. She started laughing after a minute. A real one. "We don't even have a ring," she said. "We can fix that," I said. "I know," she said. "I'm not worried about it." She wasn't. That was the thing about her. She knew what mattered and she didn't confuse it with the things that didn't. We stayed on the couch for another hour before either of us moved to do anything about the day. The book sat closed on the cushion beside her. The coffee went cold. Outside a siren passed and faded and the city went quiet again. It was an ordinary morning. And somehow that made it feel like exactly the right moment for something that wasn't ordinary at all. We got married on a Saturday in September, late afternoon, when the light comes in low and golden and makes everything look like it's been there a long time. It was small. 31 people. Family, a few close friends, the ones who had been around when things were harder and hadn't looked away. We rented a room above a restaurant that Catherine liked, the kind of place with exposed brick and long wooden tables and candles in glass jars. No photographer running around telling people where to stand. Just a woman with a camera who stayed mostly to the edges. My sister was there. Catherine's brother. Paula from HR, which sounds strange maybe, but she had been quietly decent to us from the beginning and Catherine had wanted her there. Jeff came. Marcus came. A handful of others. Greg Fallon was not invited. The ceremony was short and honest. We had written our own words separately, without comparing notes beforehand. I was a little nervous about that. I'm not someone who is comfortable performing feeling in front of people, and I had written and rewritten what I wanted to say 4 times before landing on something that felt plain enough to be true. Catherine went first. She stood across from me and held my hands and spoke quietly, which meant everyone had to lean in slightly to hear her. She talked about being 50 years old and having believed, for a while, that the chapter for this kind of thing had closed. That she had made peace with that, or thought she had. And then she talked about the coffee kitchen on the 3rd floor, and the cup she almost didn't take, and how I had just put it on the counter and waited, and how that quiet patience had turned out to be the thing that changed everything. She said, "You never made me feel like a problem to be solved. You just made room." I had to look at the floor for a second. When it was my turn I kept it short. I talked about the budget meeting. About watching her press that pen into the page and keep going while someone took the credit and nobody said a word. About thinking, even then, that there was something in her I wanted to understand better. I said, I didn't know that's where it started. But it was. I said I wasn't going to promise to be extraordinary. I was going to promise to show up, pay attention, and put the coffee on the counter and wait. A few people laughed. Catherine smiled in a way she usually kept for private moments, and I was glad everyone there got to see it. The officiant finished the formal part, and we signed the paperwork at a small table set to the side, which felt oddly ordinary and exactly right. Catherine signed her name and handed me the pen and said quietly, No going back now. And I said, I wasn't planning on it. And she nodded like that was settled. Dinner was long and easy. People talked across tables and glasses got refilled and someone gave a toast that was genuinely funny without trying too hard. Catherine sat beside me the whole evening with her hand resting on my arm occasionally, the way she did when we were somewhere and she wanted to check in without interrupting whatever was happening around us. At some point near the end of the evening I looked around the room. At the people who had come. At the ones who hadn't, who had made their assumptions and kept their distance and been wrong. I didn't feel bitter about it. I had expected to, maybe. But mostly I just felt like those opinions had stopped belonging to my life somewhere along the way without me noticing exactly when. Catherine leaned over and said quietly, You went somewhere. Just thinking, I said. About what? How different things look from here than they did a couple years ago. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Yeah. They really do. She picked up her glass and I picked up mine and we didn't make a speech about it. Just a small quiet acknowledgement between two people who knew what they had come through to get to a room full of candlelight and the people who had shown up. We left around 10. Said goodbye at the door, hugs and handshakes, my sister holding on a little longer than usual and not saying anything, which was her way. The car was quiet on the way home. Not an uncomfortable quiet. The kind that comes after a full day when everything that needed to happen has happened. At some point Catherine reached over and rested her hand on mine on the center console, the same way she had reached across that corner table the first time she said okay. Same hand. Different everything else. I didn't say anything. Neither did she. We drove home through the city on a September night, the streets lit and moving, the world doing what it always does, and somewhere in the middle of all that ordinary motion, the two of us were quietly beginning whatever came next. It's been 3 years now. Maybe a little more. Catherine got promoted last spring. Division head. The kind of role she had been ready for years before anyone offered it. She came home that evening and made dinner like it was a regular Tuesday, and when I asked her how she felt about it she thought for a second and said, Like it's about time. Then she laughed. Then we opened a bottle of wine we had been saving for something and didn't talk about work for the rest of the night. I think about the budget meeting sometimes. The broken chair. The way I almost just got up and left. I'm glad I didn't. I don't have a lesson to attach to any of it. I'm not sure it works that way. Things happened, and we made choices inside them, and here we are. The apartment still has the unreliable elevator. Roy the superintendent is still extremely reliable. Her coffee mug is still on the counter. My side of the bed is still the worst one and I don't mind. Some mornings I wake up early and just sit in the kitchen with the light coming in, the good morning light she noticed that first Sunday, and I think about how close I came to a very different version of this life. Not with dread. Just with a kind of quiet gratitude that doesn't need a name. She's enough. I'm enough. Most days that feels like more than enough. That's the whole story, I think. Or at least, it's as far as I can see from here.